Good day, everybody. This is Susan Elliott, host of the Mean Lady Talking podcast. And I wanted to apologize. In some places in this podcast, it sounds like I'm banging into my microphone, which I'm not. So after I was editing and I was trying to figure this out, what was going on, because I have a Blue Yeti that's attached to a blue shock mount, which is the perfect shock mount for it, which is supposed to stop the noises that you're going to hear in some parts of this podcast. And the shock mount is attached to a Radius 2 arm, which is attached to a table. And what I realized after I was editing, I was trying to figure out what happened because I knew that I wasn't moving the microphone around. I knew I wasn't banging into the microphone. It seems like the table that the arm is attached to is wobbly. And every time I speak into the microphone, it vibrates the table, and then the Blue Yeti, being as good as it is, picks it up. So anyway, I apologize for that. It's a 15-minute podcast. I'm not going to re-record it, and it only happens in a few places, but I did want to apologize. So I'm going to get a new table, and hopefully this won't happen again. Thanks so much, guys. Hope you enjoy Watts Family Murders Part 3 coming up now. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Welcome to the Mean Lady Talking Podcast. This is the podcast that tackles tough questions about relationships, life, love, and loss. It may not be the advice you want, but is probably the advice you need. And now here's your host, grief therapist, motivational speaker, relationship expert, best-selling author, and attorney, the not really mean lady herself, Susan J. Elliott.
Good day, everybody. This is Susan Elliott, host of the Mean Lady Talk podcast, and welcome back to the third in the series of the Watts Family Murders. My name is Susan Elliott. I am the host of the Mean Lady Talking podcast, and I am a therapist, grief counselor, attorney, blogger, author. We do have groups. We do have boot camps. We do have individual counseling. If you need any of those services, please let me know. GettingPastYourBreakup.com website. And there is a page on the drop-down menu of resources. It says GPYP, GPYB, GBOT resources. That shows you all of the materials that are out there. I talked about Chris Watts and the narcissist, and I'm going to go into a full-blown analysis of that at the end of this. I just want to get to the textbook definition of an antisocial personality disorder. When I left off with the narcissistic personality disorders, I said that when in school, when you're learning how to do diagnoses through the DSM, one of the most important parts of it, and it's very different from disorder to disorder, but a very big part of it is understanding the frequency of symptoms. Like for a major depressive episode, it has to be going on for a certain amount of time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about when you are diagnosing bipolar, that is a Axis 1 mood disorder. You have to look at both the manic episodes and the depressive episodes. And for a manic episode, it tells you that there needs to be a distinct period of abnormally and persistently elevated, expansive, or irritable mood, and abnormally and persistently increased goal-directed activity or energy. For example, my late husband Michael was involved with a woman who, when she went into her manic state, she just cleaned like a maniac, like 24 hours a day. Not that he didn't need it. I mean, he probably kept a hold of her a lot longer than he would have before because of her crazy cleaning. When you have personality disorders, they typically don't give you how long it could be. But for anything else, when you're looking at a major depressive episode, it has to be over a period of time. Now, I remember when I was in school and I was taking a test, and one of the catches on the test was that there was no time specified. And I remember writing, I can't give this person an exact diagnosis because I don't know the frequency of the symptoms. So anyway, here we have antisocial personality disorder, which is a very severe diagnosis, you want to be extra careful before you even think about this, especially if it's a younger person. Many times, like I've said, people come into the criminal justice system or the psychiatric system, and that's where we find them, and that's where we diagnose them. They don't come waltzing into counseling going, hey, I feel like killing everybody today. Can you help me? We don't get them. Antisocial personality disorder per the DSM. There is a pervasive pattern of disregard for and violation of the rights of others occurring since age 15, meaning that they look at it from age 15 on, as indicated by three or more of the following. 1. Failure to conform to social norms with respect to lawful behavior. 2. Deception, as indicated by repeatedly lying, use of aliases, or conning others for personal profit or pleasure. 3. Impulsiveness or failure to plan ahead. 4. Irritability and aggressiveness, as indicated by repeated physical fights or assaults. 5. Reckless disregard for the safety of self or others. 6. Consistent irresponsibility, as indicated by repeated failure to sustain consistent work behavior or honor financial obligations. 7. Lack of remorse, as indicated by being indifferent to or rationalizing having hurt, mistreated, or stolen from another. The next criteria, you need 3 or more of the following from age 15. But the individual has to be at least 18 years of age. You cannot give somebody antisocial personality disorder before 18 years of age. What they give them is a conduct disorder. So if you've had a conduct disorder, or you've had an oppositional defiant disorder, something like that, they can turn it into antisocial personality disorder if at age 18 you're still doing all this stuff. And you also have to make the differential diagnosis that is not schizophrenia, it's not bipolar disorder, it's nothing else. You have to rule out other things. It is a very serious diagnosis. Again, in the last 10 or 15 years, there has been this subtyping done. One antisocial personality disorder subtype is nomadic, where somebody feels jinxed, doomed, cast aside. This is a lot of homeless people. And I'm not saying homeless people are sociopaths. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that sometimes if a person is a sociopath, they just wander into the streets and they really don't care about anyone or anything. A malevolent subtype, which is how we think of sociopaths, is sadistic, paranoid, belligerent, desires revenge, or is callous or guiltless. There's also a type where somebody feels deprived. They seem to be a martyr, like everything happens to them. And they seem to take more pleasure from taking than from giving. And when I talk about my homicidal ex-boyfriend, I remember him telling me that he had broken into the house of this old gentleman. He didn't hurt the guy. The guy was home. He went in, he took his money, he took some things. I guess he terrified the guy, and he left. And I was so shocked because he had absolutely no idea that that was not okay or had any empathy for that man. I'm like, you scared the hell out of this guy. He couldn't get it. He enjoyed taking from that guy because he perceived him as having more than he did. Another subtype has histrionic features where they take a lot of risks. And another one is narcissistic features. This is how the personality disorders can overlap. They want to be thought of as unflawed, invincible, formidable, and when it's questioned, they overreact to it. So many times this is how people get murdered. So the next thing that I'm going to talk about before I go into the Chris Watts and how all this fits in with him and what I think and all this other stuff is I'm going to talk to you about why we use the word psychopath. There's no page in the DSM that says psychopathic personality. The psychopath is a related syndrome to antisocial personality disorder. So normally a person will be diagnosed antisocial personality disorder first. And in 1835, a British doctor named J.C. Pritchard coined the word psychopath to mean morally insane. Somebody who's incapable of feeling shame or guilt. And even though that's already in the antisocial personality criteria, psychopath is somebody with extreme behavioral deviance. It's in the context of someone with intact reasoning and communicative ability. It means that this person is thinking. They are not mentally insane. They're not organically insane. There's nothing wrong with their brain. They're morally insane. That's the definition of a psychopath. In 1904, a doctor named Kraepelin, I believe his name was Kraepelin, he said there were 4 types of psychopaths. One, and this all is kind of old-timey language, but this is what he said, so I'm telling you what he said. Morbid swindlers and liars. 2, criminals by impulse, meaning they're not really thinking about it. 3, professional criminals. So that would be like Tony Soprano. And morbid vagabonds. I don't know what a morbid vagabond is, but it sounds like a really cool name for a rock band. So somebody out there with some musical talent, get right on that, please. I want the morbid vagabonds to play at my next event. Anyway, let's look momentarily at the Chris Watts, whatever the hell went on here. First of all, when I did a male stalking victim podcast and article, I did the article a long time ago. And I originally did the article in response to Alice LaViolette, who was the Jodi Arias domestic violence expert, and I use the word expert very loosely. She was actually advocating for Arias on the stand. She was no way, shape, or form acting like an expert. She also used a lot of contradictory language. She also mixed things up. There was so much miscommunication. I was so outraged by her testimony that I originally tapped out. And that's how I do my articles and how I do my podcast. I mean, everything's kind of off the cuff. I'm just sitting here right now. I've talked about this a million times. I'm just talking to you in front of a microphone. I don't have any notes. I looked in my DSM so that I could read you the definitions, but other than that, I'm just talking. Alice LaViolette said that Travis Alexander did not show fear of Jodi Arias. Therefore, she was not a stalker. This is a woman who crawled through the man's doggy door. This is a woman who was found sleeping under his Christmas tree. This is a woman who was completely bizarre and insane. And he did file a police report. It was never brought into trial, but he did file a police report when his tires were slashed. And he did say that he thought that it was her. But there was nothing, it was more prejudicial than probative, which is how a judge decides whether or not a piece of evidence gets in. And prior to any trial, the defense and the prosecution bring motions in limine. And what it means is this particular topic is off subject. Like, don't even try to bring it in. You might try to bring it in. You can't bring it in for whatever reason. And then the judge usually does an analysis, rules on the motions in limine, says, yes, you can have this. No, you can't have that, whatever. So my thought in the Jodi Arias case was that either the prosecution just knew right off the bat that the police reports were not going to be admitted into evidence, or there was motions in limine and the defense successfully kept them out, which probably was the right call. So there was no rebuttal to her. And she said that all of this behavior, Jodi Arias, the reason it wasn't stalking behavior was because Travis Alexander was not afraid of her. I lost my mind. Because Travis Alexander was raised with homeless drug addicts, he didn't know how to show fear, and for most of his life, he wasn't able to show fear. Then you put just the role of men in our society. Men are trained to not show fear no matter what. But somebody with the background that Travis Alexander had, of course he didn't show fear. And what kind of fear would he be showing? I mean, he did talk to his friends about her being a lunatic. He was afraid she was going to kill herself. He was afraid to cut it off completely. So I did that article. And then when Shana Hubers killed Ryan Poston, There wasn't the same kind of thing, but I took Ryan Poston as an example because this was a guy who came from a very happy, loving, well to do family. The exact opposite environment than Travis Alexander was raised in. Ryan Poston had a good family, good friends, had never really struggled a day in his life. Again, completely different from Travis Alexander. But his stalker ex girlfriend killed him, and his stalker ex girlfriend killed him with his own gun. Now, any article I have done about the male stalking, and you can go back, you can read the article, you can listen to the podcast. I have never, ever, ever referred to Ryan Poston as anything but a gun enthusiast. That's what I say. I am of the belief that there needs to be more gun control. Looking at all the weapons in Ryan Poston's apartment gave me hives because I'm so far on the other end. I have never once said, oh, see, having all those guns doesn't help you when your girlfriend's going to grab one and shoot you in the face. I've never said that. I've never politicized this topic. And when I've talked on gun control, I have never once mentioned Ryan Poston. You will never find those two arguments coming anywhere near each other. I've been nothing but an advocate for men in having crazy ex-girlfriends, and you need to keep them away. You need to get the restraining order. You need to not let them in your house. And I use Travis Alexander and Ryan Poston as examples of two very, very different guys, but cut down in the prime of their life from crazy stalker ex-girlfriends. That is the extent of it. I do not believe in using anything about that case to support or further any of my own personal convictions, except for the fact that male stalking victims need to be taken seriously. It's a serious issue. And people are not telling guys it's okay to get a restraining order against your stalker ex-girlfriend because sometimes they murder people. And the other thing is that as an attorney, I know that Ryan Poston owning guns, there would be no criticism of it that would get into a trial because it's not relevant. So when I talked earlier about victim blaming, and I talked about Shanann Watts, and I talked about people saying she was a controlling harpy, or maybe she was the narcissist. Excuse me, people, but she's dead. She didn't kill the children. He killed her and the children. So when I was in this one conversation, when I was reading some of these comments on YouTube where somebody was suggesting that maybe Shanann was the narcissist, I was just appalled. I was like, are you crazy? My God. Anyway, like I said, there should not be any criticism of Shanann Watts because it's not like she had it coming. It's not like she could have done anything in the world that would have made her deserve that particular ending. None at all. And who knows if she already knew her girls were dead? We don't know that. We don't know what that woman went through. Except the prosecutor, Michael Rourke, described to the judge on the day of sentencing, November 19th, which is my birthday, the prosecutor made very strong statements because he wanted the judge to enforce the plea agreement. And he talked about 4 minutes to kill somebody by strangulation. And she had to know that A, she was dying. She was dying at the hands of a man that she loved. B, her baby was dying. And maybe she already knew her other babies were dead. Who knows? So the prosecutor allocated to the judge so that the judge knew exactly the horror of these murders. The prosecutor talked about poor little Bella fighting for her life against her father. The guy that she sang in that little video, My Daddy is a Hero. Daddy the hero is now killing me. And I'm fighting for my life and I'm never going to survive this. The horror of all of that night and how that little girl must have suffered. And then being jammed into the oil tank. So disrespectful. So horrific. So when you look at morally insane, you go, yep, that's it. That is a definition of morally freaking insane. No morals whatsoever. So beyond the pale that there's very few people in the world we can even put up there with him. Like, how do you do that to your own children? How do you do that to children that you were just at a birthday party with, 12 hours before? Picking them up and wiping their noses and all this other stuff. It's ridiculous. I've read things where people were saying that maybe Shanann had Munchausen syndrome because she said that she had lupus and now the girls had nut allergies and all this other stuff. How in the world is a woman with lupus and a kid with nut allergies equal Munchausen syndrome. I mean, it was like she wasn't in and out of the hospital. Oh my goodness, such craziness, which is why I decided to do these. And I know that I'm all over the map here, but let me get back to the plea agreement, or start on the plea agreement, because I don't think I've started it yet. Okay, so this is the question, and I want you legal eagles to think about this. And whether you're whether you're an actual attorney, or you want to be an attorney, or you hate attorneys but you thought you'd play anyway. Okay, let's think about this. Chris Watts was playing with Nicole Kessinger for 5 weeks while Shanann and the girls were in North Carolina. Now, I teach a lot of different classes, and one of the classes that I teach is positive self-talk and affirmations. And what I always tell people is that affirmations take at least 30 days to work. And if you read the science of habit, the science of starting a new routine that you want to get used to, it takes anywhere from 20 to 60 days to instill a new regimen. Like if you want to go to the gym and you want to make that part of your life, the first 3 weeks to 2 months might be torture. But if you keep doing it, after a while, you get into it and you've developed this new habit of getting up and going to the gym, and it becomes much easier. So it takes time. Again, we're dealing with somebody who is a sociopath, who's a psychopath, who became those things. I believe in those 5 weeks that Shanann was in North Carolina. I believe that he was a narcissist, a covert narcissist prior to that. But during those 5 weeks, he evolved into a sociopath. What was weighing on him? What was weighing on him was the fact that they were already in financial trouble. And like I said, when I got pregnant for the 3rd time, my ex was freaking out. We can't afford this baby. You have to abort this baby. We didn't have the happy little Watts family reveal of, oops, we did it again. We didn't have that. I mean, he went straight to, you have to have an abortion. And when I refused, he stopped talking to me. He started bringing an 18-year-old girl into the house. We were like 25, 26. And he started bringing this 18-year-old girl in the house. And they sat in my living room. They played video games. And he never talked to me. He did not want this 3rd baby. He said we are financially struggling, which we were. But that's no reason to get rid of a baby. I just couldn't do it. And I was punished for it. For the rest of our relationship, I was punished for it. But I was really punished for it. And this is all in my story on the Getting Past Your Past YouTube channel. So they were under all this financial pressure, and we were not under the kind of financial pressure they were under. They said that they struck deals with their creditors, which meant that they were not in a Chapter 7 bankruptcy where they have to give everything back. So he's probably looking at this high life with Nicole Kessinger. This is what it's like to not have the kids and Shanann around. He said in his police interview, I was able to figure out who I was again. And that's kind of a bit of BS, because he was finding it out through Nicole Kessinger. It's not like he was on his own. It's not like he was thinking, oh, now I can be Chris. He was being Chris in another relationship. It wasn't him spreading his wings and flying, to go off and be the kind of guy he'd always wanted to be. No, he was infatuated, in love with this woman who, in the middle of this police interview where he's supposed to be conning them that he had nothing to do with the disappearance of his wife and children, he knows nothing about it, and he doesn't know where they are, he doesn't know what happened to them, and when he finally cops to the fact that he's having an affair, he starts telling the police what a wonderful woman she is. And this is when you think that your wife is missing, your children are missing, and you're going to tell me? It's like the school nerd scored a date with the prom queen, and now he's bragging about it to the football team. That was the way Chris Watts came off. The police had to redirect him back to what happened to Shanann and the girls. He was so inappropriate. It just doesn't make any sense. He didn't even know how to play the part and play the part correctly. He said that he was feeling being Chris again, but I think that he was just finding a taste of freedom. This is what it's like to be without Shanann. This is what it's like to be without the kids. Now, if I just leave her, if I just divorce her, I'm never giving Nicole Kessinger anything. And how is he going to afford kids with Nicole Kessinger? There's been some debate about whether she liked kids, she didn't like kids. You know, did he kill the kids because she said she didn't like kids or whatever? I have no idea. I have a podcast about her in the can. It's so scathing. I don't know if I'm going to publish it or not. But anyway, so this is my theory. He thought this all out in his head. Over those 5 weeks, it became bigger and bigger and bigger. Now, Shanann is getting that something's wrong, and she's saying, how can you be so cold? And I know that that was the reaction I had to my husband when he was standing against the wall when I was delivering our child, and the child was in trouble. And I said to him, could you come over here? And he said, it's late and I'm tired. Oh, excuse me, I'm in labor and the baby's dying. Anything? No? Okay. What he was looking at is the only way out of this marriage is divorce with a whole lot of child support. Maybe alimony. I don't know what they were making. So it started to formulate in his head. I've got to get rid of Shanann and the girls. I mean, that was the whole crux of the plan. On the day that the murders happened, if the police were not there first, he might have actually gotten away with it. But he was a terrible liar. If you look at his body language, and there's several videos on YouTube where people analyze his body language, but it's so obvious. I mean, it's like, I learned body language in Psychology 101, like freshman year of college. So the folded arms, the rocking back and forth, the putting his hands on his head, you know, all those things. Another thing that he does is he stares straight at you. He locks his eyes when he's lying. And that's a technique that people know that when they're lying, people tend to look away from the person that they're speaking to. If you're aware that you're telling a lie and the person that you're speaking to is a person of authority, like he was talking to the police, his eyes were very locked, where he was saying something that was completely untrue, and his eyes were locked, like he's not going to blink if his life depended on it. He probably was going to come home and then finish the crime scene, finish cleaning up Shanann's stuff, and I don't know what he was planning on doing with her stuff, or calling the police and saying, I mean, was he going to say, all her stuff's here? I don't understand. And the house was locked from the inside. The only way that anybody could get in would be him. You know, he's like, you're a dumbass. So I don't see any reason to think about him with the murders. He was a very bad murderer. He didn't get away with it for any amount of time. So the defense goes to prosecution with a deal. Take the death penalty off the table and he'll plead to whatever they want him to plead to. That was the defense. That was the defense attorneys went to the prosecution and gave them that idea. Michael Rourke flew to North Carolina. I think he took one of the investigators with him. Flew to North Carolina. Presented it to the Rusak family, which is Shanann's family. And he also gave them an overview of the death penalty in Colorado. The current governor at the time said that he would not enforce the death penalty. The incoming governor said he wouldn't enforce the death penalty. Chances are that nobody would ever see this guy get put to death if they went to trial. And so Michael Rourke presented this to the Rusaks, and they said something to the effect of, why didn't you accept this like yesterday? They wanted that to be sealed. Now, the part that's puzzling, the defense team requested DNA from the necks of the girls. And my assumption is that either Christopher Watts told his attorneys, stuck to the story, Shanann strangled the girls and then he strangled her, or they just wanted to cover their tracks. But anyway, the judge denied that motion. The reason that the judge denied the motion, which seems to me to be the reason, and this may or may not be true, is that the DNA expert that they were using to support their argument, because you can't just go to a judge and say, hey, judge, we want this. You have to give them reasons why you want this and how you're going to achieve this. So they asked the judge if this DNA expert, so-called DNA expert, could analyze DNA from the necks of the girls. The expert seemed to be somebody that was a bit of a shady character or did not have the greatest reputation, or other people thought that he was a fraud or something. The judge seemed to reject the motion based on the expert that they were relying on, and not a lot more than that. But I guess the judge didn't want to turn into a circus with this real questionable expert. That's my opinion. Anyway, the judge denied that request. And so even though Christopher Watts said Shanann killed the girls, they had him plead to 9 felonies, and he couldn't have done worse. He just couldn't have done worse. At trial, he could not have done worse except for the death penalty. You have to ask the question why the defense would go present a plea agreement that only takes the death penalty off the table in a state where the death penalty is highly unlikely to ever happen. Like, he had nothing to lose going to trial, and probably could have gained some reasonable doubt. He might have gotten some of those charges, some of those felonies dropped. He pled guilty to 3 counts of first-degree murder, 2 counts of murdering a child under the age of 12 with whom was entrusted to your care. So if you have responsibility for a child under the age of 12, Colorado basically says it's a heightened responsibility, and therefore there's more punishment if the child is entrusted into your care. You're a caregiver, a teacher, a parent, a doctor, something where this child under the age of 12 was entrusted to your care, and they died either by your hand or something that you did. 1 count of unlawfully terminating a pregnancy, and 3 counts of unlawful disposition of a body, something to that effect. So there wasn't anything that he could have been charged with that he wasn't. Normally, a plea agreement will have some benefit to the defendant. So I was reading these arguments by a group of lawyers that was on this discussion board that lawyers frequent and talk about a whole bunch of boring things. But this was kind of an interesting conversation where these lawyers were saying, what was the purpose of the plea agreement? Because you will never see in the history of homicides a murder take place in August and the person sentenced in November. It just doesn't happen. You could have a parking ticket and have more extensions before you ever get your fine. So lawyers were saying, oh my God, this was so weird. Like, it was so fast. So why would Christopher Watts plead out so fast with actually no benefit to him to doing that? So the lawyers were saying, well, maybe he just wanted to spare his family the spectacle of a trial, because that it would be the trial of the century. It would be so crazy and horrifying to sit there and listen to it. He would have to testify. He would absolutely have to testify. If his defense was, I killed Shanann in the heat of passion because she had already killed the girls, he would have to take the stand for that. He would absolutely have to. In my opinion, he would have to. But if you want to say that he's a sociopath, and I absolutely believe on the day of the murders when he came home and he was doing whatever the hell he was doing, and he was at work, he was acting solely as a sociopath, as a psychopath. He was morally insane. What he just did to that woman and those children is morally insane, just beyond the pale, just beyond any shred of human decency. On his sentencing day, he shed tears, actual tears. If you look at, I hate to keep picking on Jodi Arias, well, really, I don't, because I hate the woman. And the reason I hate Jodi Arias is because she has tried to hijack domestic violence as some sort of self-defense, which it never was, and it never happened, and I don't believe her. But she supposedly was in all this emotional pain when she was being grilled by the prosecution, or when she was being lightly tossed some softballs by her defense attorneys. She never cried once. There was not a tear in that woman's eye. But if you look at Christopher Watts, on the day of his sentencing, he actually cried. That's almost unheard of for a sociopath, for a psychopath. He looked broken. He didn't look like the same guy who was standing in front of the TV camera saying the stupidest things that he could ever say, like, oh, I'm in the middle of a nightmare that I can't wake up from. I spent a summer in New York during law school because I wanted to come back to New York to practice law, and I asked a woman who was my house cleaner to come over and let the cats out. We had this little backyard where the cats would go out and sun themselves, and then they come back in. And I said to her, you have to watch the cats because the little one, who was a feral one, would try to get out. I didn't worry about my Maine Coon because he was so big that he would go up into the tree, and he was the only cat I ever saw who could fall out of the tree and not land on his feet. He was so big. So I didn't think he was ever going anywhere, but I told her, I said, you have to watch them because you don't want them getting out. And we just had like this little postage stamp size California backyard, but I wanted the cats to have some time out a few times during the week, because I let them out every day when I was home. Well, she left Michael a message at 4 o'clock in the afternoon that my Maine Coon was missing, and she had to go to work to her night job. I was furious. I was absolutely furious. He called me in New York. I was flipping out. I kept calling every couple of hours. We're talking about a cat. Okay, I love my cat. My cat was terrific, but he's not my wife and children. You know, he's not my spouse and children. If my children were missing, I mean, it was all I'd be talking about. So I remember calling Michael at like 9:30 at night. I'm like, did he come home? Did he come home? And he was like, no. And I was like, what are you doing? He's like, I'm going to bed. I'm like, you're not going upstairs to bed. I said, go downstairs, sleep in your recliner. It was like he slept in the recliner every night. The night the cat's missing, he's going up to bed. I was like, no. And at like 3 o'clock in the morning, he said that he looked up and he saw these two little ears sticking up in the front of the house. And he was like, oh, here he is. He called him fat ass. So he's like, here's fat ass. And he called me in New York right away. I hadn't slept. I was worried about my cat. And I kept saying, my God, he's probably out there somewhere. He's probably scared. He never goes anywhere. He's not very flexible. He's not very agile. You know, he's just this big kind of goofy cat that just doesn't have a lot of the protective mechanisms that other cats have. You know, he's just kind of a big goofball. And I thought he'd go to anybody. He wasn't afraid of people. I was calling every few hours. Where is he? Oh, my God, Papa. All I did was talk to my friends about, oh, my God, he's probably somewhere. He's probably so frightened and alone. And I'm going to have to fly back to California tomorrow if the cat doesn't come home. I'm going to have to go find him myself. Chris Watts didn't say any of that stuff about his wife and kids. He was like, oh, you know, I was hoping the door would open and those kids would barrel rush me. How in the world could you even talk like that? You should have been saying, I don't know where they are. They're probably scared. If somebody has them, you have to come home. You don't talk about you. I didn't say, oh my God, I was in New York and I was so nervous and my cat was missing and I couldn't sleep all night. No, I was like, where is my cat? He's probably alone and hurting. So anyway, if you look at that behavior that day, you're looking at a pure evil psychopath. When you look at the guy on sentencing day, he actually has some empathy, sympathy, whatever it is that shed that tear. And I don't know what it was. I don't know what he was thinking about. He might have been thinking about Nicole Kessinger. He might have been thinking about how he screwed up his whole life. I don't know what he was thinking about. But he was feeling something that day. So his psychopathology didn't carry forward. It seemed like he got himself into this place before the murders where he planned this out, and it must have sounded good to him, and nobody will ever find those bodies. And It was a stupid, stupid plan. He never said why. And one of the things that I find peculiar about the plea agreement is the fact that there was not more pushback of tell us what happened. I'm sure there was at some point because Michael Rourke took this case very personally. He's an excellent prosecutor, and you could tell this was a painful, painful case for him. And I know that in his post-sentencing interview, he said he'll never tell us. And that was very painful. So I can't believe that they didn't go back a few times trying to say, look, tell us how and why this happened. Tell us how the girls died. Tell us how Shanann died. And he refused. If he had such an awakening of conscience where he's now crying and he's agreeing to plead to all this stuff, why would he not tell them? Like, it seemed to me that if this whole pleading to everything was a conscience clearing decision, why didn't he just tell them? Maybe he thought that's enough. That's all I'm doing. I'm going to plead guilty to the whole shebang. But there was no benefit to him other than not going to trial, maybe not putting his family through that. I don't know. So the interesting question is, why did Chris Watts offer up a plea agreement where he basically got no benefit? Plea agreements normally have a benefit on each side. The only benefit that he had was not telling where, when. They had to accept the plea agreement without him telling them details. But whatever the reason for that plea agreement, it's hard to understand what benefit to Christopher Watts was there in that plea agreement other than not being put to death or not wanting his family to be put through hell, which might be the case. It's hard to say that he benefited in any way from that plea agreement other than shutting it all down, but I've never seen a case resolve itself that quickly. So it was very startling to a lot of lawyers how quickly they got to sentencing day. And so it complicates the psychological picture because you have to think, was he temporarily insane? Temporarily morally insane? And did his morals come back to him? What the hell was that? There are things about, and I'm going to do a Nicole Kessinger podcast, but there are things about the situation that just doesn't make a lot of sense. Other than the fact that he killed those gorgeous girls, and how could you do that? And I think that was all financially motivated. The girls became not real to him. And I think what happened was after 5 weeks without them, going to North Carolina, kind of be putting in the spotlight where they were shining the light on their relationship because they hadn't seen each other for 5 weeks, which is a long time. It must have been a shock to his system. And he thought, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to do this anymore. Okay, how do I get out of this? Well, if I walk out, we're screwed because we're already in trouble with our creditors. We entered agreements with our creditors, and a divorce is going to impact those agreements. We're going to lose everything. And Shanann's going out on maternity leave, or she might not be doing Thrive for a while. And since it was driven a lot by her lifestyle, her business, how was the divorce going to impact her ability to make an income? That might put him deeper in debt. He's never going to get out from under the financial burdens and have a life with Nicole Kessinger. That much was entirely clear to him. The 5 weeks was a fantasy. The 5 weeks was vacation from life, vacation from responsibility with kids, vacation from responsibility with marriage, just frolicking with the girlfriend. Week 6, you're together again, and bam, it's like, this is your life, buddy. This, or run off with Nicole Kessinger and pay Shanann a lot of money. So you and Nicole are never going to have anything. So that was where he was at. And he planned these murders, which was so crazy. And then he pled out to this plea agreement that took the death penalty off the table in exchange for him pleading guilty to absolutely everything he could possibly plead guilty to. I mean, there was nothing more that he could be charged with. And he got the maximum sentence that he would ever get. So basically, it's over. That's it. It's over. So, but on sentencing day, he had emotions. He had some kind of feeling for something. I'm not sure what. But the whole idea of being a temporary psychopath is not one that we normally talk about because it normally doesn't happen. I mean, people snap. That's why there's 24 seasons of Snapped, the show Snapped, where people just snap and kill their spouse. But that's not the same as becoming a full-fledged, over-the-edge, completely unparalleled psychopath within a given period of time. So many days, so many hours, whatever it was. And then you just switch into some kind of empathy for somebody somewhere, even if it's self-pity. Usually, psychopaths do not have a lot of empathy, even for themselves. They're not going to be shedding tears. So that's the question. Now I'm going to confuse you guys even further because now I'm going to confuse you guys even further. And you're probably going to be saying, "You waited till the end of a 3-part series to start talking about this?" Yes, that's how I roll. I sit here, I talk, I think, I shout shit into a microphone, and you get whatever order it comes out. And sometimes I edit it, sometimes I don't. Okay, so here's a $1 million question. As many of the people who follow my work know, I look at a lot of brain studies, neuroscience, because I believe in positive self-talk and the science of affirmations, which, because people have kind of trashed affirmations, people don't understand affirmations, people don't understand how they really work, or how you really need to construct them to make them effective. They've been trashed because so many people that don't know what the hell they're talking about try to teach it, and it comes out ass backwards. But when I was studying neuroscience, there was a study from a scientist in England, I believe. I think it's in London. So about 5 years ago, I read this study and I thought about it on Chris Watts' sentencing day, where they did this study. And at the time, I didn't really know any psychopaths that I wanted to apply it to, but I thought it was an interesting study. They came out with brain scans of psychopaths, and they determined that it's not that psychopaths have no empathy. The classic literature on psychopaths is that they are more likely to reoffend because they don't have empathy for their victims, and they often don't have empathy for themselves. But then this study in England found that psychopaths can switch empathy on and off. So is that what we're seeing? Are we seeing somebody who has been a psychopath, didn't have empathy, or is just so much of a psychopath that he turned it on and off? And maybe he turned it on and off their whole marriage, maybe his whole life. I don't know. Other people would have to tell me what I really think happened here. My take on the whole thing is he was a covert narcissist all along. He felt trapped. He felt stuck in a life that he wasn't quite sure about. And a lot of the stuff that my narcissistic husband did with the financial stuff, maybe Chris Watts did. My husband used to blame me for all the finances, like I was the only one that was dealing with finances. Maybe he saw Shanann getting pregnant. I don't even know if they planned the baby, what happened. Maybe the walls were closing in on him. What are we looking at with Chris Watts? Are we looking at a covert narcissist who went over the edge in the 5 weeks that it took to be away from the girls and Shanann and just objectify the girls as money and Shanann as a problem, and then flip the switch into sociopath/psychopath, morally insane, because those murders, the way they were done, and stuffing those girls in the oil tank, total psychopathology, total psychopath. And then what happened? Did he fall back into covert narcissism with some empathy, some feeling? Or is he still a psychopath who had a switch on? And if he had a switch on, what was the switch off when they came to him and they said, please tell us what happened? Did he switch it off then? Say, nope, not going to do it. And then they came to him and they said, Chris, are you really going to put your mother through a trial? Turn back on? Is that what happened? What do you think? Let me know. Why was the plea agreement so not beneficial to Chris Watts? But it really didn't give the answers to the why and the how and what exactly happened. And I really believe that the families wanted to know. I know the Shanann's family wanted to know, and I know the prosecutor wanted to know. But what was going on in the negotiations of the plea agreement? How hard did they press the defense attorneys on get this guy to tell us? Or they just talked with the family and the family wanted it over with? Who knows? Those conversations are private. It's an interesting topic for debate. And there has to be some way to learn some things from this, even though it's so bizarre, it's so outside the norm, it's even outside the norm of crazy murderers. So if you have any thoughts, if you have any questions, let me know. Think about your own life. Think about frame of reference. Stop projecting your meaning onto other people. Do a lot of observation. Stay off social media. Unplug a few hours every day. Unplug over the weekend. Make your life your own. And understand that a lot of the lives on Facebook are not real. You're not in competition with people that are having fake book lives. And it's really important to understand that if somebody is having issues. And one of the things that I just want to leave you with is this is a horrific case, and it's very difficult for anybody to understand what in the world was going through his head. And I think that some of the legal questions, how fast they got to a plea agreement and how fast they accepted a plea agreement, are interesting. And a lot of the lawyers that I've spoken to and that I've eavesdropped on don't really have answers as to how that came around, because it seemed like the defense went to the prosecution with the idea of the plea agreement, not the other way around. So I'd really like to continue the conversation. If you guys want to talk about the legalities, you want to talk about the psychologies, what's going on here? What do you think? And please avoid victim blaming, because I really cannot tolerate it. So I don't want to hear that she was a narcissist, she had Munchausen, all that nonsense. Don't come at me with that, because I'm just going to lob it right back at you. So if you want to continue the conversation, you want to ask questions, let me know. I do have more things to say about this, and I will. But anyway, talk to you all soon. Let me know what you think, and let's be careful out there. Talk to you all soon. Bye-bye.